If you think your lens or camera might actually have a focusing problem, I'll show you how to test it. Now, a lot of people just kind of willy-nilly test their camera and it doesn't focus right and they think they've identified the problem, but as we've learned, focusing problems can be caused by so many different conditions that it's almost certain that you're going to be misdiagnosing the problem. It's usually not a hardware problem, but I'll show you how to identify exactly if it really is a hardware problem. And you're going to start by making yourself a focusing target. And all I've done is I've gone online and printed out a random focusing target. You don't need anything in particular, so as long as it's black and white. I mean, you could use any piece of paper that had black and white writing on it. And then you want to steal a piece of glass from a picture frame and tape it to the glass just as flat as you can. Now, the reason you're not taping it to cardboard is cardboard might move or it might flex. Glass is always perfectly flat. And when you're talking about measuring focusing problems, we're talking about millimeters here. So even if the paper were to peel off from the side a little bit, that little millimeter could show up as a focusing error. So you really want this to be just as flat as you can possibly get. If you were to print it on a sticky label, that would be even better than taping a piece of paper to it. Now we need to make sure that the focusing target is held perfectly upright, and this needs to be really, really vertical. So I'm going to have my bear friends here hold it up, and I suggest that you grab a level and make sure that it's perfectly vertical. I don't happen to have a level, but I do have my phone here, and I know that the edges on it are a perfect right angle, so I'm just going to push it against it and make sure that it's completely straight. So now I know I can focus my camera on this focusing target, and the focal plane will be completely parallel to the sensor heading off in all directions here. So what I need to do to measure if there's a focusing error is put something that has measurement markings on it, like a tape measure. A wooden ruler or a metal ruler works even better. I'm just going to tilt this down at an angle because if I were to lay it flat, well, I wouldn't be able to read the numbers on it from where I'm going to put my camera. So for my purposes, I'm just going to put this ruler right against the glass there, right on the number 4. You actually want to line it up with the front of the glass, like wherever the front of your paper is, because we're measuring with as much precision as possible here. So this is going to be my focusing target, and I'm going to line my camera up at exactly the same level as this and focus somewhere on the contrasty area of the target. Then I'll be able to look at the ruler and see exactly where on the ruler it focused on, and if it's front focusing or back focusing, it'll be pretty obvious at this point. I'd also like to point out that I have bright lights shining on this. You don't want to do this in dim lighting because dim lighting reduces your camera's ability to focus. And we really want to create a scenario that allows the camera to focus in the best possible scenario, because this will ensure that it's as accurate as it can possibly be and eliminate the possibility that the focusing problems are caused by some other source. So this looks pretty good to me. Now I'm going to set up my camera. Now, you'll notice that I have my camera on a tripod. This is because so many problems with non-clear pictures can be caused by camera shake or a moving camera. So the tripod is really important if you want to eliminate all other problems. To make any focusing problems as prominent as possible, I want to set up my lens to use the shortest depth of field possible. The depth of field is the total range that will appear to be in focus. So by making that really nice and shallow, any misfocusing is going to be really, really obvious. So to get the most shallow depth of field possible, I'm going to zoom out to the longest setting. On this camera, it's 105 millimeters. Next, I'll move the camera until it's almost in focus, but not quite. I still want the camera to have to autofocus on it. All right, that's pretty good. Just make sure you're about close to the minimum focusing distance on the lens and that you're zoomed all the way out. Now I need to go ahead and frame it so that I can see both the focusing target and the ruler here. So for convenience, I'm going to turn on live view, even though I won't do my shooting in live view. And that actually looks pretty good. I'll adjust the height of it up just a little bit. There we go, that's good. Now the way the focal plane works is it's always completely flat and completely parallel to the camera's sensor. So I need the camera's digital sensor to be perfectly parallel with my testing target there. And because I made sure my testing target was perfectly vertical, perfectly upright, I need to make sure my camera is perfectly vertical too. Most modern cameras happen to have a digital level built into them, so check your camera's manual, see if you have that feature built in. Sometimes you can just hit the info button enough in live view and it'll show you that level. If yours doesn't have it, you can pick up a bubble level for just a couple of dollars. Amazon sells them, B&H sells them, and they go right in the Flash hot shoe. So I'll put that in there, and then I'm gonna adjust my tripod to make sure that it is perfectly level. Now I don't care if it's twisted left to right, we just need to make sure it's tilted up and down to be perfectly level. So my camera positioning is all set. Now I'm going to put my camera into aperture priority mode. I'm going to select the lowest possible f-stop number by moving my main dial. On this camera it is 4.5, on this lens rather. And now I'm going to select ISO 100. And now I'm going to set the focusing type to the single shot focusing mode. This is going to be called something different on different cameras. Most of the camera world calls it AFS, including Sony and Nikon. In the Canon world, it's called one shot. The single focusing mode causes your camera to focus until it achieves a focusing lock. Sometimes it doesn't happen instantly, it might have to hunt around a little bit, but it's the ideal way for your camera to focus, and that's why we want to use it for this test. Next, I'm going to select only the center autofocus point. Now before I actually take a picture, I'm going to just mess up the focusing on the lens because I want it to actually work. So I'm just going to give it a twist so that it will have to focus. Now my camera is all ready for the test. I need to make sure that live view is turned off and then look through the viewfinder and focus the camera using the autofocus system. Now one last thing before I take the picture, I'm going to set my camera to a shutter delay. I'm just going to configure it to wait 2 seconds after I press the shutter. The reason for this is that when I push the shutter button, it can introduce a little bit of camera shake. I can twist the camera just a little bit and that can cause the picture to be blurry. So by setting a delayed shutter, I can be 100% confident that I'm not shaking the camera at all. Now I'm ready to push the shutter button. Now I'll go ahead and take a few more pictures just to have a few to compare to in case something went wrong. Up until now, we've been testing our SLR's phase detection focusing system, and this is your camera's primary focusing system. Whenever you're looking through the viewfinder, it's using this phase detection system because it's the most effective way to focus. And if you do have a focusing problem, either in the lens or the body, this is where it's going to show up. Your camera's other focusing system is a contrast-based focusing system, and that's what it relies upon anytime you're in live view mode. So I do also want to take a few pictures with the contrast-based focusing in live view mode because the contrast-based focusing isn't prone to any sort of problems. That's because it's actually reading the information in from the sensor itself. Your phase detection focusing sensors are off the sensor and sometimes they get a little misaligned, and that's where your focusing problems can come from. But the contrast-based system, because it's using the actual image data, it's basically foolproof. So we're going to take a couple of sample shots with the contrast-based focusing system just by using live view and then focusing the image. I'm just going to push the AF on button here to allow it to focus. Notice that the image on the live view disappeared for a second and I could hear the mirror flipping up and down. That's because this camera is in quick mode focusing for live view, and that means that it's still using the phase detection focusing system even though I have live view on. So I want to be sure to turn that off. I'll do that now. Now I should be able to focus in live view, so I'm going to press that AF on button so it focuses. and that green icon means that it worked properly, and because I didn't hear the mirror, I'm confident that it's using contrast-based focusing. Now I'm ready to take another shot. There's that 2-second delay, and I'll take a couple more shots just to be sure. Looking at the LCD screen isn't going to be ideal. I mean, you can zoom in and get some general idea, but for the best results, go ahead and load the pictures on your computer. So let's go check out my results and see how my lens did. Here we are in Adobe Lightroom, which is the app I use to preview and organize my photos. I took 3 pictures with the phase detection focusing system and then 3 with the contrast-based focusing system in live view. So I want to compare 2 of these pictures. So I'll take this phase detection one and this contrast-based one. I just control-clicked them both. Now I'll right-click them and then click Open in Compare. Compare is just a tool that lets you see the pictures side by side. So let's get in nice and close on those pictures, and this is the full picture. So I'm going to zoom right into where the numbers on the ruler are. I'm going to use the contrast-based focusing picture as my benchmark. So even if I've done something wrong in the testing system, if things aren't aligned quite the way I thought they were, it'll show up on the contrast-based system. So I just want to make sure that the phase detection system is focused on about the same spot as the contrast system is. And indeed, it does look like they both focused right about on the 4, which is about what I expected. I'm looking at these little lines to see exactly where they blur in and out. Now, an interesting bit of trivia, depth of field extends both in front of and behind your focusing point, but only about 1/3 of it is in front of the focusing point. So I'm focused right about on the 4 here, and you can see you get it pretty clear for about 4 or 5 of these lines here, but as you move back, there's about twice as much in focus. This is just an easy way to illustrate a concept that if you want to get as much of your picture in focus as possible, focus about 1/3 of the way back from the very first subject that you want to be sharp. Anyway, comparing these 2 pictures, they do seem to be focused at about the same distance, so I feel like this lens and camera combination are focusing properly. But looking closely, you'll notice that the picture on the left here isn't quite as sharp as the picture on the right. So why would that be? Because I was using good techniques for everything. Well, there was one thing that was different. For the contrast-based focusing picture here, I was using live view, and in live view, the mirror is up. When you press the shutter and you're looking through the viewfinder, the first thing that happens is the camera flips that mirror up. Even though I had the shutter on a delay, I didn't have mirror lockup turned on, and I probably should have, because the mirror slapping up shook the camera just a little bit. And that's why this picture is just a tiny bit less sharp than this one. Nonetheless, it's good enough for me to tell that the focusing system is working properly. And next time I have it on a tripod, I'll have to remember to use the mirror lockup. Now, no matter what your result was, you have a little bit of work to do. If your camera did focus properly in these ideal situations, then you know that you have to update your technique a little bit. Now, just the process of testing taught you a lot of the different techniques that you want to use to get really great focusing. You want to use a tripod, you want to put your shutter on a delay, and ideally both the camera and the subject are nice and contrasty, well lit, and stationary. Anytime you vary from that, anytime things get a little dim or subjects aren't contrasty, like they're just grays or nice fading colors, focusing is going to be much more difficult and a lot less precise. It also happens when your subject doesn't have to be completely flat, because your focusing system might pick up on the tip of somebody's nose or their ear or something in the background, and so that causes all sorts of imprecision. There's no camera that's perfect at all of these things. It's really just something that takes practice and kind of getting to know your camera and knowing the situations where it might misfocus. So just keep at it and it'll get better with practice. Now, if you determine that your lens or camera is indeed misfocusing, then you can probably fix it with some camera settings. Now, the worst case is you might have to send something back for repair, but many times you can just make a few adjustments to your camera's menu system and get it working perfectly for yourself. Now, the focusing problem could be in the lens or the body. Usually it's going to be in the body because that's where the focusing sensors are held, and sometimes they just get misaligned a little bit. If the focusing problem is with your lens, you can identify that by repeating the same test with different lenses. If you only have the one lens, well, it doesn't really matter. But if you have more than one lens, go ahead and test them all out and see how they do. And if you find that all of them are front focusing a little bit or all of them are back focusing a little bit, then you can be confident that it's your body that's causing problems. If it's just one lens, then you'll just make the setting to that particular lens. Now, most modern cameras, at least the higher end cameras, support lens micro adjustments. So what I would do is to go to Google or any browser and search for the name of your camera, like 60D or D3100, and lens micro adjustment, and see what comes up, because there's probably somebody out there who's documented the exact steps that you can follow to fix the problem. I here happen to have an old Canon 5D Mark II, and it does support lens micro adjustment, so I'll show you what I do for it. So in the menu system, there are custom functions, and one of them is for autofocus and drive, and there are lots of little tweaks in here that you generally don't need to change, but for this one, the AF micro adjustments, you'll see I can choose from either adjust all lenses by the same amount or adjust individually by the lens. So I'll choose to adjust them all by the same amount if I were to determine that it was a problem with the body. And then by pushing this button, I can adjust it up or down. Now, there's no particular measurement for these numbers, like +5 or -5. They're not in millimeters or anything like that. You basically have to perform a series of trial and error. So you might drop it down by 2 or 3 the first time and go ahead and lock that setting in, and then repeat the test and find out if it fixed the problem or if it made it worse. If it makes it better but not quite enough, you can increase the number a little bit more. If you went past it, if you're now back focusing instead of front focusing, you know to dial it down a little bit. If you find you don't get consistent results between the different tests, well, it just means your focusing system isn't precise, it's not perfect, and that's true of every camera. It's particularly true of the less expensive cameras. The higher end cameras tend to have a more precise focusing system. So what you might have determined is just that your particular camera model doesn't have enough precision for the sort of short depth of field that you want to work in, and it might be time to consider an upgrade. But I honestly rarely see these focusing problems as being very serious. So again, make an adjustment to the micro adjustments, repeat the test. If it doesn't get better, set it back to 0. If it does get better, then congrats, you're done and you've solved your focusing problem.